there's a lot of trajectory logic out there by the people who are buying into the industry, buying up these catalogs, where they apply a ruler, a northeast gradient, and say that's where the market's going to go. But that's not how the market's going to go. The composite of that next dollar this business is going to generate is going to be different from how it worked in the past dollar. And I think that next dollar is going to be much more publisher favorable than that dollar from yesterday. And that's an important, how would you say in economics, nonlinear break almost in the data set, which is as these new sources of revenue come in, the composite makeup of it and how it gets paid out changes from how the old source of revenue used to pay out. It's a bit of a technical point, but it's basically saying stop applying rulers and northeast gradients and saying I can predict the future. If that's what you're doing, get a job in a shoe shop because you shouldn't be in this game. It's much more nuanced than that.
Right. Everything just can't be growth that's up and to the right. It may be that way, but there needs to be some nuance. Is that not what an MBA
there qualifies you to say? Up and to the right.
It's like that WeWork chart, the one where that from the pitch deck where the arrow just goes up and up and up. That's now infamous given the fact that the company filed for bankruptcy. But
my favorite one was somebody who worked in the live music industry, I should say. Came up to me and said, Will, what you're doing with economics at Spotify is amazing. It's digestible, it's understandable, it's really clear, that data science pioneering work. But let me tell you how it works in my world. You give me one bar that's bigger than another bar, and I can sell the shit out of it. I was like, okay. So it all comes down to bar charts, up and to the right in bar charts.
One question I do have, though, this is about the relationship between the songwriters, the publishers, and that share, and the record label side. I think there's a few things that happen with the shift, and we've talked about this on past episodes, but one of the reasons that those two sides were much more equal when you first did this analysis is because streaming was a much smaller share of the pie, and physical/digital downloads were still the largest bucket of revenue, at least from what comes into the industry. Now it's flipped where streaming is a much larger piece of that, and that's a lot of the piece. But the other thing I think we've seen over the past 20 years is a lot of the major labels have acquired a lot of the publishers too. So even with some of those considerations there, I do wonder that, yes, we're seeing the pie shift and we're seeing the growth for the publisher side. As you and Tati mentioned, there's a number of tailwinds in this direction that may continue to see that grow. But is there a ceiling that exists just because of the nature of one of these organizations owning the other?
Well, we had a 3-year inquiry in the UK into music streaming economics. That question was front and center of a CMA investigation, and they argued no. So we've been dragged over the coals on this one, and the conclusion was there was not, how would you say, a distorted market through the ownership of these companies. That's important because I could argue the opposite, but I'm not the CMA and I didn't spend a year investigating this market. I think the other thing to remember is, yes, it does look lopsided when we think about streaming, but one thing I bring into this year's report is a quick lesson in history. I'll use round numbers, but if you think about a download, a publisher got 8% of that revenue in the UK at least. In streaming, they're getting 16%. So as the market's changed, it's changed in their favor, vis-a-vis the good old days. And something I really want to tackle in this year's report was to hit nostalgia on the head and give it a TKO blow like Joe Frazier did to Muhammad Ali. Like, absolutely knock this out. If you go back to 2001, how much were publishers seeing from the consumer revenues generated by selling CDs, the occasional CD or vinyl on top? That's about 2.5 billion. And if you look at it today, they're getting well over 5 billion. So they're doing better in unit terms, a higher rev share than previously. And they're doing better in aggregate terms. They're seeing more cash come through than previously. So in that, in terms of, are they getting such a bad deal? Well, that's for them to argue. We can get into fairness. It's an abstract concept. But to be clear, they're getting a better deal than the past, which is quite often where they reflect on and say, that was the good old days. No, these are the good old days.
Why do you think there's a disconnect there then, specifically on the publisher side? I know the recording side is something different, but on the publishing side, yeah, as you put it, we're more than 2x larger from what the songwriters, publishers, and their CMOs are getting from the label share.
When you start to whittle it down in terms of as the money is paid through the value chain, when it comes down to the actual individual writers, then you can see the discrepancy. So, let's just play around with some maths here. So 1 million streams might get you $5,000. $5,000 on a 20% royalty is $1,000. If there's 4 members in a band and a manager, that's $200 pre-tax each for 1 million streams. That's not a lot of money. Then you have to slash that by a quarter, a third, to work out what's left for the songwriter as well. I think that's where the problem is. That's not an easy one to solve. And we can go deep into why that problem exists and where solutions might be, but it's not an easy one to solve in terms of where else is there wiggle room for there to be more money. We'll come to that. But I think the other thing is just to stress what I've stressed throughout our 3-year inquiry in the UK is a simple sentence which summarizes a dilemma. We're making more money. 41.5 billion is more money, but we've got way more mouths to feed. It just comes to that basic anomaly of the supply side explosion. In the UK, at least, the population of songwriters since Spotify launched in 2009 has trebled. How do you feed all these mouths? It's a positive problem. I love the fact that we have 3 times as many songwriters than we did back in 2009. That's great. That's great for copyright. That's great for creativity. Feeding them, that's a different question.
Thanks for watching Trapital on YouTube. If you enjoyed this clip, please make sure to check out the full episode that's available on our channel. And while you're at it, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get all the updates on all the clips, videos, and breakdowns that we have on Trapital.